Good morning. Happy session after keynote. So today our presentation is going to be on Red Hat Satellite 6, securing Linux lifecycle in the public sector. And because they give me a subheading, I like to call this presentation Government Customers Like Nice Things Too. I'm Rich Dorito. I am one of the 3 product managers on the satellite product line. I am joined today with Chris Reynolds.
Hi, I'm Chris Reynolds.
My friendly neighborhood cloud architect, who focuses on many of our North America public sector customers. So, who's Chris?
I'm Chris. Thank you. I specialize in the cloud. It's really just somebody else's computer at the end of the day. I do a lot of disconnected stuff, particularly with satellite and this little thing called whois. Anybody heard of whois?
Is your mic on?
I don't know. Is it not on? It's probably not on. You know, step 1, turn it on. There we go. Now it's on. So I deal with disconnected environments, specifically satellite and whois. I am a satellite SME, and I am also a automation SME. And yes, we can automate you getting a cup of coffee. If something like Grubhub has an API, we can do it. I've been here for about 3 years at Red Hat. I was formerly a technical account manager. I also deal with a lot for Ansible for operations. And you can find me at RHC Reynolds on the interwebs.
So, that's Chris. And this is me. So it's baby picture time, baby. So I was in my photo album the other day, and I was like, you know, this is a really cute picture. I haven't used this one yet in the presentation. So that's me. I'm Rich Dorito, product manager for satellite, and another product we have called SAM that we're sunsetting, so I still manage that. I'm the content guy. I do a lot of work around disconnected subscription management stuff. So if you have a burning activation key or vert who question, by all means, please come ask me. I've been at Red Hat 7+ years, working on 8. I used to do technical marketing for satellite, and I'm a Python guy. I do like Ruby a little bit, and I'm kind of conflicted about that now. And if you ever want to follow me on any form of social media, I'm Side Angle Side. So if you're in the Satellite 6 channel on Freenode or GitHub, once upon a time I wanted to be a geometry teacher, so that's where the handle comes from. And then I decided to go into software and actually make money. So that's who I am. So effectively, why did we create this presentation? And really, we started looking at some of the workflows around satellite. How many folks here are satellite customers? I assume most of you are if you're in this presentation, but not all. How many of you guys are in the public sector, whether North American or in any other geography? Right? So one of the things we were looking at was we're like, public sector customers have certain requirements that aren't necessarily like just policy rules. In many cases, they're actually laws, right? And we needed to make sure that our tooling, such as satellite and the various other workflow tools, currently support that. Just as an interesting statistic, just so that you know, if you're a disconnected satellite customer, you're in the minority, but not by much. Roughly 25 to 30% of our satellite customers are fully disconnected. That is, my infrastructure is in a air-gapped environment where it cannot contact the internet in any shape, form, or fashion, right? So again, from our perspective on the satellite side, we're like, that is a significant amount of our customer base. We need to make sure that our tooling, processes, and all that stuff supports disconnected, because it's very common for us. And that's why we really put together this presentation, right? Like, why are you here? Or if you're a CEO or CIO, it's really a matter about how do we handle all of our security stuff. If you're a dev or an ops person, it's like, what automation can I get to either install my tools and run, or getting the security people off your back? That's a common thing for everyone, even in commercial. Get the security guys off my back. So that's something that we're going to focus on a lot. So being the cool guy that I am, and I actually learned how to make slides in the past year or so, we actually have an agenda. On the agenda, the first thing we're going to cover is how to do disconnected content management. Because again, in these disconnected environments that we deal with a lot of our customers, just because you're disconnected from the internet does not mean that you're not required to patch your systems. In fact, it becomes a little bit harder because we have to move content around and get content in the right places so that we can patch those systems. So we'll talk about some of our strategies around disconnected content management. Part 2, we're going to cover security and compliance management. So things like OpenSCAP, right? I have a set of security policies that I need to ensure that some or all of my systems need to be compliant with. What tools do we have in the Red Hat portfolio to help you with your security and compliance needs, right? So if you're required to be, DISA-STIG compliant, for instance, or USGCB compliant, how do we actually make that the case, right? How do we audit a system to see, yes, we do comply with the various rules inside the STIG, or no, we don't? and then how we can override some of those. Last, we're going to cover some of the vulnerability management capabilities. So inside of satellite, right, what's the currency inside satellite that we use to identify systems in our environment that need vulnerabilities addressed? So things like, how do we search for CVEs, right? How do we search for Red Hat advisories? How do we mirror the two together? And how we can easily roll out vulnerabilities leveraging a satellite server. Lastly, in part 4 is the call to action, a whole bunch of references. So when you get this presentation after Summit, we have about 3 or 4 slides worth of links that kind of go a little more depth into these various areas that we're talking about. Because again, this is a 45-minute presentation. We just can't give you all the data, but we got a whole bunch of resources, an operations guide around disconnected management, things like that you can look at. And then in part 5, we'll give you guys some time to have questions. Where we think we'll finish up our part in about 30 minutes, which will leave us about good 10 or so minutes for questions. Depends on how long I ramble. But we will have time at the end for questions, and if not, we'll be available after the session out in the hall, and you guys can ask us whatever you want. So on to disconnected content management. This is like my favorite hobby inside Red Hat. So like, everyone inside of Red Hat knows that like, if you got a question about how to move content in a disconnected environment, there's 2 people to find. We're both on the stage. Don't throw a grenade, because Red Hat will be seriously hurt if they lose both of us, okay? But why do folks usually run in a disconnected environment? One of which is just policy says you can't. So I have a lot of customers, even on the commercial side, I have a lot of customers that are like, my production satellite cannot ingest content directly from the internet. I have to ingest it into either a dev satellite or a staging area, and then ingest it into my satellite. In the case of an air-gapped environment, like I kind of have no choice because this environment is completely disconnected from the internet. I'm going to have to walk that content in. And then the reason in the middle is kind of more of a political one, but we've noticed a lot of customers that are like, our internal proxies are just so jacked up that we'll just rather be disconnected and load our satellite from CD, right? And I see 2 guys over there smiling. They're like, yeah, that's probably us, right? That's okay. We'll support you. All right, so inside of satellite, both satellite 5 and satellite 6, there's effectively 2 models for how we can introduce content into a satellite server in a disconnected fashion. So the one model up top is what we call the inter-satellite sync model. This is a model where you have one satellite server connected to the internet. It synchronizes a number of Red Hat products as well as non-Red Hat products into the satellite server. You then take that content, export it to disk or to ISO. You physically walk it into another environment, unpack it, and then you import it into a satellite server. And then also we have what we call content ISOs, which are pre-created by Red Hat. And they're available on the customer portal, and you can download those content ISOs 4.7 gigabytes at a time, and then unpack those and leverage them to populate your satellite server. So if we look at this kind of from a chart perspective, they gave me a new graphing tool, so I actually made pictures and stuff. So in the ISS model, what you effectively have is in step 1, you ingest that content from the Red Hat CDN into your connected satellite. Possibly usually on an unclassified network. In step 2, you then run a number of tools inside satellites, effectively the hammer command with some export options. Allows you to export that content to disk. In satellite 6, we actually support CD, DVD, and Blu-ray ISOs. Does anyone actually use Blu-ray anywhere? There's the one guy. I'll buy you a coffee later. I didn't know anybody actually used them. Yeah, so we can support Blu-ray ISOs, and I think we actually just let you specify the size, so we just make the ISO whatever size you want. In step 3, you transport that content over into your disconnected environment, you make it available, you then synchronize, you point your satellite at that content, then synchronize that content into your satellite server, and then you will then make that content available through content views, what have you, to your systems. You manage your systems like normal. And then over time, you will repeat this process to bring in new products, to bring in new updates to the existing repositories you have. So that's how ISS works. This is effectively how it works in both Satellite 5 and Satellite 6. The second model we're talking about is the content ISO model. In the content ISO model, it's very similar as far as kind of the workflow. It's just on the unclassified or connected side, you do not have a satellite server. You just download the ISOs from the customer portal, and then you put those to disk, and then take them into the disconnected environment, export them, and make them available in your satellite server. So let's talk about the differences between them. right? Because a lot of folks ask me this all the time. They're like, I'm disconnected. Should I use content ISOs or should I use the ISS model? I am a strong proponent of the ISS model for a number of reasons. One of which is because, does anyone know how often Red Hat releases content ISOs? Not often enough, right? I mean, it doesn't matter how often we release them, it's not often enough, right? If there is a particular bug or vulnerability that you need to address, we don't release the content ISOs every hour, so it's not often enough. So what I generally recommend for folks who are like, hey, I need to support a disconnected satellite, you want to have a connected satellite that you can sync from the Red Hat CDN whenever you want, create your exports whenever you want. The other upside of the inter-satellite sync model is that we don't create content ISOs for every single Red Hat product. Unfortunately, if we did, we would have to support, let's see, how big is the production CDN right now? North of about 10 terabytes worth of ISOs. So we only do them for specific products, mainly RHEL, mostly by popularity. RHEL, OpenShift, OpenStack, the more important products. So as a general model, we do recommend if you need to support a disconnected satellite, use the ISS model, synchronize that content from the Red Hat CDN for any product that you want, any repository you want, then export it and import it on the other side. There are some folks who do need to use the content ISOs, right? These folks, for whatever reason, don't have a internet-connected presence where they can actually, install a satellite server. So as long as you understand the caveats between the two, that's fine. But again, I am a strong proponent of the ISS model. Okay. So what can you do with inter-satellite sync? So for folks who are familiar with Satellite 5, the way we export content in Satellite 6 is different, and it's arguably better. And I'll explain. So in Satellite 6, we have what we call the default organization view, which is basically, here's all the content that I got from Red Hat. I can export that in its totality. I can do incremental exports of that, and I can then take those exports into a disconnected environment. And that's great if I have one or more satellites that are disconnected that I need to keep in sync with a satellite I got from the CDN. Now, another thing that we can do in Satellite 6, which is new, is we can export a content view, specifically a content view version. So one of the things that I've heard from a lot of my customers is, Rich, I do have to support disconnected systems, but I don't really want to support a disconnected satellite, right? I mean, I'll do it if I have to, but I really don't necessarily, want to support another satellite server if I can avoid it, especially if I have a lab that only has 3 to 4 systems in it. It seems kind of overkill to deploy a satellite server just for 3 to 4 systems. And you are absolutely freaking right. I mean, I love satellite. I'm really happy when everyone deploys them, but a satellite for 5 systems, it's kind of overkill. So what you can do with inter-satellite sync in Sat6 is you can actually take a content view, right? So a content view is a group of repositories, a snapshot at a point in time. I can actually export that to disk or export that to ISO, right? And that ISO is nothing more than an ISO that has a number of Yum repositories on it. And I can just mount that up on those workstations, those 4 or 5 workstations that are in that disconnected environment, and I can just run Yum and update them that way. So I can still manage that content centrally with satellite. However, I can export it to ISO, and then I can make it available on those workstations. I don't have to do the export, then import, then make it available process. So that's a capability you have in Satellite 6 that you did not have in Satellite 5. I like this capability. There's a reason why I put it in. And then the last thing is the ability to export a singular repository. So you still have the ability that, hey, I just want to export this repository, whether it's a Red Hat repository or otherwise. Just want to export this repo to disk so I can then maybe make that available as a Yum repository in a disconnected environment. And I can do that both as a full export and as an incremental export. So one other thing we can do with content, and this chart has lots of numbers and stuff. I'll explain it because this is one of the coolest things we did for a federal agency, is we have something we call the alternate content source. How many folks in here are satellite capsule users? How many folks have satellite capsules in a remote data center on the other side of a crappy WAN? Yeah, pretty decent amount. So we had a government agency come to us and they said, hey, Rich, we want to deploy a satellite capsule in all of our remote locations. We got 100 remote locations around the world, and they can be anywhere from well-connected locations to a place that has, two systems that run on some randomly unnamed, island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean connected by satellite internet. We need to put a capsule there, but if we build a capsule and we synchronize it over to WAN, we're going to pull 60, 70 gigs of data over a satellite internet connection. It's going to take forever and a weekend. It's low bandwidth, high latency. It's the absolute worst thing for satellite servers, right? So how can we solve this problem? Okay, we have this capability, what we call the alternate content source. And effectively what the alternate content source is that I can take an export from a satellite server or a content ISO. I can use that export as a means to sideload RPMs into a capsule server that is connected to another satellite. Okay? And I'll walk through how this works. So in step one, usual satellite workflow, I synchronize content from the Red Hat CDN. In step two, I export that content to disk or to ISO. Step three, I give it to a guy, and he actually literally flies it on an airplane or sends it via postal mail or what have you to our remote location. Okay? So I have a bunch of ISOs and export of RHEL 6, for instance. Take those ISOs in step four, I throw them on a web server or a file server of my choosing. So it can be a web server, it can be like HTTP, NFS, FTP, we don't really care. We configure our satellite capsule server to actually use that content. So we basically say, hey, capsule, your parent is this satellite server, but I want you to sideload these RPMs from over here. Okay? Then in step five, we initiate a synchronization process. So the capsule server reaches out over to WAN, in this case, my crappy satellite link, to the satellite server and says, hey, what RPMs do I need? Satellite responds back with a list, says, here's all the RPMs that you need. And then in step six, the capsule says, well, I actually have them closer to me in this NFS mount, so I'll load them from there. Okay? So it's a good way to initially populate capsule servers that are available, or you need to set up on the far side of a WAN in the event that you don't want to actually physically ship 60 or a couple hundred or even near terabytes of data across the WAN. So this is really cool for us because we had that customer, again, they were supporting a remote location with really low bandwidth, high latency links. We were able to populate their capsule server. I think the whole sync process took like an hour, right? Because the only thing that actually transited over to WAN was actually the YUM repo data, not all of the RPMs. So this is a cool capability. It's been in satellite since satellite 6.1. We don't advertise it probably as much as we should, but it's one of the coolest features that I like to use. It's important if you're dealing with content management, especially in a disconnected space or semi-connected space. So the next section we'll cover, unfortunately, we didn't have a demo for that because it's kind of really hard to demo exporting content. Also, it's kind of boring, so we didn't demo that. So next we'll cover security and compliance management. So inside of Red Hat's portfolio, we've taken up the OpenSCAP set of tools. And OpenSCAP inside of RHEL, because it starts within RHEL and then we build on top of it in our other products, introduces a NIST-certified security constant automation protocol scanner. Okay? And what it allows us to do is it allows us to scan systems and containers for known vulnerabilities, so unpatched software, or compliance with security policies. Right? And everybody in here, I can pretty much guarantee that you have some kind of security policy that you need to be compliant with. Right? And it can be something as well structured as like PCI DSS or like a government baseline, or it could be your own internal stuff. So like simple stuff like thou shalt not log in as root. Right? You need to have an ability to say, well, how many systems is that particular rule true or false on? And then also, if something is amiss, how do we remediate that system, right? How do we bring it back in line with that policy? So what we deliver, especially now in 7.5, is the ability to actually remediate a security finding that we will find. So an example would be your security rule states we only need to have protocol 2 turned on for SSH. Well, in the SCAP content we deliver, we actually give you a bash remediation to fix your SSH configuration file, so some SED magic, right? Or we give you an Ansible playbook that you can copy-paste directly into Ansible Tower and actually remediate that system. Okay, so we can now do the security compliance audit, and we can do the security compliance remediation. And all of that is included inside of RHEL itself. Okay, so that's just normal core RHEL capabilities. You can do this with any Red Hat Enterprise Linux subscription that you have. So inside of OpenSCAP with RHEL, we also ship content, right? Because the tool is dependent upon content. We ship that with RHEL. We also develop it in the upstream. We work in conjunction with the various US government agencies as well as some of the commercial agencies. We also deliver the SCAP Workbench. The SCAP Workbench is a GUI-based tool that allows us to take that OpenSCAP policy, those set of rules, be able to tweak and tune them for our environment. Maybe we want to override a rule. Maybe we want to select specific rules out of a policy, but not all of them. So for example, there's certain rules that are like, you need to have var log on a separate partition. Maybe in your environment, you're like, we don't really care that much about that one, but we like the rest of the policies, so let's turn that rule off. So the Workbench gives us the ability to customize SCAP content. So SCAP gives us the ability inside of RHEL to audit a whole bunch of things. So we look at things like RPMs, configuration files, partitions, containers, and VMs. OpenSCAP can scan a VM at rest. It can scan a container, right? This isn't just the OS files and stuff. It's all of those. It inputs with SCAP content, and then we give you the results in a number of formats. We have our format, which is the default. We also have an HTML report and an XML report. So the key point about OpenSCAP is that it needs to be part, like security and compliance needs to be part of your entire workflow. So we can tie in SCAP into all of these various areas inside of Satellite or inside of RHEL. So you can actually provision a system and say, you know what, when I provision a system, I want it to be compliant with this policy, right? And then we'll use the remediations in the SCAP content to harden that system. You can build it into your configuration and your automation, right? Because you have all of the Ansible capabilities that we now include inside the content. It's all reusable stuff. It's all Ansible code, some old Bash code, but if you got Ansible, why would you use Bash? Make it part of your migration, so when you bring systems over from like SAT5 to SAT6 or from no management tool into Satellite, you can do that. And then lastly, it's integrated into all of our workflows. So we'll show you this in Satellite, but one of the things that Satellite gives you the ability to do is to do OpenSCAP at scale. So I can centralize my reporting, I can centralize my auditing, I can centralize my scanning, I can delegate who has access to the reports and scans so that people who need to care about compliance don't have to come bother me and say, hey, Rich, I need you to run this script, or hey, Rich, show me this report. I just give them access to it. So if we look at the capabilities we have, inside RHEL, these are effectively the use cases we have. RHEL's use cases are really around the single system use case. I want to audit a single system. I want to write policy. I want to remediate a single system. You look at what Satellite gives us the ability to do. We up-level that at scale. Since in Satellite you have your systems grouped by whatever kind of grouping mechanism you use, you now can align your scanning and your policies to those groups. I want to scan groups of systems. I want to apply one or more policies to groups of systems. I want to build my SOE so that it's secure with my policy and be able to show that. Or I want to be able to delegate some of those capabilities to people other than me, the satellite operator. And then lastly, inside of Tower, you have the ability, from an automated remediation perspective, to be able to take a single tool and be able to run automation against those groups of systems to remediate them. Or I want to tie it into my provisioning so that I can ensure that systems are compliant at build time. And then, obviously, from an automation perspective, I want everyone to be more independent. So that being said, Chris, if you want to demo the security and compliance stuff.
My time to shine. All right. Who here is actually a security officer? Who's the ISO or ISM in the room? Are there any? Wow, none. Sweet, we can pick on them. They're not here to defend themselves. Cool. So, we have right here the SCAP Workbench. I have loaded up the RHEL 7 profile for the DISA-STIG. This thing has a lot of nerd knobs. So we actually want to customize it and turn some of these knobs. So this little pop-up's here, and we can actually start selecting them. Sure, GPG check is enabled for all Yum packages. I've already selected a few others. Let's install McAfee at runtime. Why not? So I have created my customizations. We're going to create what's called a tailoring file. We're going to take that tailoring file and save the customization only. Then we're going to save the file, hit enter. Now, new 7.5, you have 3 different remediation options down here. You have Bash, Ansible, and Puppet. We can export that out, remediation.yaml. Here is the actual YAML playbook for all the little nerd knobs that I have changed and turned to use. So I can take this, load it into Tower, and as part of my provisioning workflow, we session timed out due to an activity. We wait for the page to load. Here is an actual system that I turned into basically a brick at this point because all the nerd knobs were turned on. So if your ISO, who usually is pretty annoying, says, come to you, did you do this, did you do this, did you do this? So instead of saying, yes, here's the XML or the XLS spreadsheet that I did this in, just say, hey, go log in. You can see at provisioning time I did it. Or if you want constant on-demand reporting, we load up the satellite server. We go to host, SCAP contents. We wait for it to load. Come on.
These bits could get out and walk.
I know. Womp womp. It's going. It's going. There we go. We upload new SCAP content. We give it a title. We're going to do a live demo gods present for the title. In the source, we are going to select our data stream file itself. We can specify any locations or any organizations that we need, and then we're going to hit the submit button. So this is the foundation. This is the base configuration, and then the tailing file, once it gets uploaded over my little MiFi hotspot. We actually tested this earlier. It is slower on the conference Wi-Fi than it is using the cell phone hotspot.
Oh, the internet's.
I know. The curse of doing a live demo. There we go. So now, let's take that tailing file that we created earlier. Let's upload that tailing file. Live demo tailoring file. We're going to choose the data stream that I customized. We'll say this one. Why not? Once again, we can specify the locations and the organizations if needed. Then we hit submit. Then we wait. Successfully created it. So now that I have my little Lego pieces in place, we actually need to create a policy for this organization to apply. So we're going to hit a new compliance policy. We're going to follow through the prompts. We're going to say live demo policy. We're going to give it the same description because I am not a creative individual. Next is going to be the SCAP content. So this is where we're actually going to select the profile, live demo gods in this case. It's got the default XCDF, so we chose the disastig, and then that tailing file that I uploaded earlier. We hit next. It goes, it goes. Then we get to the schedule. Simple cron style, we're going to say weekly. We're going to choose the weekday. In this case, I want it every Wednesday. We're going to go next. We are going to give it a location. Next. It'll get there, I promise. There we go. In this case, I have the location of RDO. We're going to specify that. Any organization, so I have the ability to create this as a complete organization-wide, or I can limit it to an individual organization and location itself. So depending on how your organization is set up, the security officer say, for all of the systems in my company or in my government organization, we're going to use this profile, but each organization will have its own tailing file because I only care about some of the nerd knobs, not all of them. Then we hit submit. So in the background, what's going to happen is Puppet is going to run, do a Puppet agent. It is going to pull down the latest profile, and then it's going to run the form and SCAP policy. It's going to run that, and it's going to give us a report. Now, this is where you can tell your security officer to go away and stop bothering me. Because, as you can see here, every week, last one was done 5 days ago, it ran the report. We have the ability to see what was passed, what failed, and other, and we can actually view that report. So when the report does come up, like Rich had said, you have a couple different options. At the top right, we have the XML and bzip, and then we have the download the HTML. But I can also hit view full report, and it will load that full ARF report format that we had earlier in a nice, simple, and pretty and colorful way for your ISO and your higher-ups to read, because we all know managers like colorful charts. So we have pretty colors here. We can actually drill down and see, say, ensure yum, here's the actual identifiers for it, the references and the rel rules themselves, and the description, and the files that were modified, and what was actually done to it. Cool. Back to Rich. There we go. Hit the present button.
Oh,
there we go.
Slides, here we go. So the last section we're going to cover is the areas of vulnerability management. So I love the fact that we name bugs now. It's actually pretty cool because it actually gives me talking points and allows people smarter than me to make artwork, because if it was up to me, it'd be like stick figures and stuff. But seriously, why is vulnerability management so important, right? It's important because the amount of folks who are actually attempting to compromise your systems is going up, and it's basically become like blood sport effectively at this point. So if you don't remember the icons, that's shell shock, heartbleed, and poodle. In case you don't know your well-named bugs. Or is that poodle? No.
Yeah.
Yes, poodle. Okay. So one of the things that you do want to note is this study, which is cited on the board, 99% of the vulnerabilities exploited in the next few years will be things that you already know about, right? So the thing that we talk about, especially if you sat in on any of my insights presentations, is an interesting comparison of time. Most security vulnerabilities, most zero-day vulnerabilities will be exploited within 40 to 60 days of release, right? Most organizations can be fully patched against the bug in 100 to 120, right? So being able to have better insight into what vulnerabilities do you have outstanding in your environment, how quickly can we address them at scale, and being able to handle maybe security mitigations is an important thing that we'll be talking about and being top of mind for a lot of folks. Another area that I want to point out is the way and the people who are actually working to compromise systems is starting to change a little bit. One thing that we've noticed is that there's a lot more nation-state sponsored attacks on critical infrastructure, whether that is government agencies or the banking industry. So I've spoke to a lot of banking customers this week, and it's basically like, dude, we're under full-on assault day in, day out. It just doesn't stop, right? It isn't like just, oh, let's try to DDoS a bank. It's like, no, they're trying to DDoS us literally every minute of our life now. And again, being able to turn that 100 to 120 days it takes to address a vulnerability, make that number shorter than the 40 and 60 in which it's going to happen. So how do we do that? We're going to do that with my product, my favorite product, Satellite. It's the greatest product in the world. Interesting trivia fact, it's Red Hat's oldest product that's still available. It actually predates RHEL. Like Satellite is what, 15 and a half now? It's like going through puberty, talking back to me and everything. But anyhow, the capabilities we give you in Satellite Server is provisioning, obviously provision systems, configurations. Software management is probably what most people think of with Satellite, right? I want to provision systems. I want to patch them, right? I want to be able to do vulnerability management across them. And then lastly, we give you some capabilities around subscription management. So one thing that's interesting that we point out in Satellite is how we do vulnerability management. So how many folks here are familiar with ITIL? How many folks in here actually like ITIL? Right? But one of the things that ITIL actually gave us was, it gave us this good model to talk about change management, right? I'm not a huge particular fan of ITIL, the process, but I do like some of their terminology. And one of the things we looked at was with Satellite, when we built our tooling, we're like, how do we give folks simultaneously the ability to lock their systems to a particular point in time with their content, because you need to do that to be able to build systems in a reliable manner, be able to patch systems in a reliable manner. We want to solve that problem, which ITIL calls a normal change. And then we need to solve the problem of, holy crap, I just found out about shell shock. How do I go out in my environment and address shell shock, right? Release the minimal amount of content possible to address this vulnerability. So the way we do that in Satellite is what we do with our content views. So our content views have both major and minor version numbers. It's been this way since Satellite 6.1, if I remember correctly. And effectively what we allow you to do is, in Satellite, you define your lifecycle environment, so your library, your dev, your QE, your production. Over time, you promote content out to those environments. That content has versions. But what happens when shell shock shows up, you have two options. Well, one option is I can just hurry up and promote all the new stuff in my environment out, but I'm also releasing content that I probably haven't tested as well. Or I can do what we do in the next slide, is we give you the ability to take content that you have in your environment and run what we call an incremental update. It's an in-place update of your published content. So let's say you have a RHEL 7 build that's available in dev in version 3 that happens to be locked from January, but you get a errata that you need to address that came out in April, right? You can update that in place with just January's content plus the April errata. So we're going to show you some of those capabilities in Satellite in a second or so. So, Chris?
Cool. Standard operating environments. All right. So, quickly go through a content view and show you what this SOE looks like for us. So, say I have a COTS application that requires me to stick on a .rel, .4, .3 version of rel because the commercial manufacturer did not follow ABI compatibility between versions. So, I have to lock my Yum repository into errata only at this point. So, I built that back in May 1st, 2017. So I have a filter here for security only that starts dates of 5/1/2017 that goes until when I built this demo out on the 4th, 2018, and I do know that's hard to read in the back, so sorry. So on the errata itself, we load the errata page up. We're going to see quite a bit of RHBAs. I need to drop down and add some more hosts for an RHSA. Control F, RHSA. So we've got this little guy here. We have a bunch of CV numbers that here are listed, and there are two things that we need to make host of. There is applicable and installable. Applicable is how screwed am I, and installable is how quickly can I fix this? So my ISO doesn't come yelling at me and say, did you do this? So I've got two hosts that are vulnerable to this, so we're actually just going to go on the fly and apply it. And now it's going to go out and do it. We go, wait, I have a snowflake. So let's go check on our snowflake host. We're going to pick this guy here, and we're going to go see what errata is actually applicable to him himself. Here you go. Here's a report of everything it is. I can hit it, and I can actually hit apply selected for everything in here and tell it to go out and apply via either Catel agent, remote execution, and fix my snowflake. Boom.
So lastly, we'll cover some of the call to action. Basically, what do I want you to do after you leave this presentation? First thing I want you to do is I want you to rate me a 5 on all the presentation. Actually, rate him a 5. His first summit presentation. So he needs 5s. I've been doing this for a few years. Seriously, you guys are going to rate 5s, right?
Yeah.
All right, I'll buy you coffee.
Just line up for the payout.
All right, so seriously, on the call to action, it's a number of resources here. So there's a document that I'm working on. If you're a disconnected satellite user, I would love your feedback on it. We're going to look to make that part of official Red Hat documentation. But it's the disconnected operations guide. It's a, hey, I need to build a satellite server that's in a disconnected environment. There are certain parts of that process that differ from our standard install docs, right? You have to change a couple of partitions. You have to do some workflows a little bit differently. This guy is intended to be a bit more prescriptive. Start at the top, finish at the bottom. You have how to build a disconnected satellite server and how to maintain it over time, okay? Second document that we have up here is one of my blog posts. This one is part 7 of the subscription manager for the former RHN user series. If you haven't read this series, I strongly advise you to read it. It's 12, 13 parts now. But it's basically, if you're familiar with satellite RHN, it covers how all the subscription manager tools work. This particular one focuses on how is the Red Hat CDN set up, because it's important to understand that for disconnected satellite. The next document talks about content repositories. So basically, when you're on a Red Hat repos page and satellite server, like all those release versions and architectures and stuff, like what the heck do they mean? There's your little magic decoder ring. Other documents, this one actually happens to be on my personal blog, but we'll get that on Red Hat property soon. It's how to rebuild a satellite server and not download all your content again. Not that you guys rebuild satellite servers often. I hope you don't have to. However, I ran into a situation where I needed to, so I documented it, and you can use it. The alternate content sources doc is what's next. So when we're talking about that cool use case I had at a government agency that needed to ship the content, so they didn't have to bring it over to WAN, that's documented in that KCS. And then lastly, this is a really cool one. It's an old article, but it's still relevant with satellite, is how to address scary errata with satellite 6, right? What's the prescriptive workflow from I heard about this nasty CVE to assess what systems in my environment needed to being able to roll that out within satellite. It's like a 3-page blog post. I mean, it's meant to be like an ops guide, follow it top to bottom. And it's still applicable in version satellite 6.3 and above. And then lastly, there's a number of OpenSCAP presentations that our OpenSCAP engineering has created. So if you need more information about OpenSCAP, feel more than free to go to that URL. And again, these slides will be available after Summit. So if you can't wait or can wait, you'll have these slides as well. So some upcoming presentations, more or less immediately following this one is the Red Hat Management Roadmap and Strategy. So that's basically a strategy of all Red Hat's management products, CloudForms, Tower, Satellite, and Insights. Satellite Labs are today. We're running 2 today, 1 tomorrow. Tomorrow, May 10th, there's a cool presentation by one of my teammates from the Netherlands. He's doing 10 things you didn't know about Satellite 6. So like kind of like cool tips and tricks that we've learned from our customers, our consultants. Those are available. Third labs tomorrow, and then we have a Satellite and Insights test drive tomorrow if you want to do that as well. So with that being said, come see us in the booth when you get time. Otherwise, we're done, and you guys can ask us questions.